ar-lein, ar Uniwaves
ac ar Express Byw. Dyma
Express Radio.
Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change on Air. My name is Lily Mott, and I'm so excited to introduce my guest who is here in the Express radio station with me today. My guest today is Amira Hayat, and she is an aspiring journalist, a poet, an activist from Cardiff who is raising awareness about a variety of issues, which we're going to talk about a ton of these. She's also so involved in the Cardiff community and working on so many different projects. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with her about some of the work that she's doing. So Amira, I'm sure that I missed some things in that introduction. So go back and fill in the gaps for me.
Well, I feel like that was a great intro. So thank you, Lily. And it's such an honor for me to be here today. I've looked at some of your podcasts and I'm like, it's such an honor to be a guest. But yeah, I feel like you've gone over most things. So yeah, I am an activist. I've been involved in like lots of different like social movements, for dating like way back. I also used to do a lot of like live discussions on Instagram, but this would have been back in like early COVID days where I'd host discussions with like a different friend each week, and we talk about different things like religion, mental health, and like lots of different topics. So it was like I just always wanted to open a space for conversation. I feel like conversation is really important. So that's where a lot of like the stuff that I do now kind of stems from. And then yeah, like I mean, I love writing, but I never really called myself a writer and a poet until quite recently, to be honest. But yeah, I love writing poetry. I'm really inspired by a lot of different poets. So I'm really working on trying to put a lot of work out there. But then other than that, yeah, I'm a student, just like Lily, we're in the same building. And yeah, I like to work with the community quite a lot. I feel like my community has contributed a lot to the person that I am. And it only feels right not only to give back, but to be like an active part of that community. It feels really fulfilling to me. So yeah, I love it. I hope that's enough.
Of course. So tell me some about that background for you and what got you inspired to start doing this work. Of course, I love this idea of giving back, and I think being able to, I wear this necklace that says too much is given, much is expected. So I love that idea. Yeah. But I think, tell me some about what got you started with all of this work.
So when I was really young, actually, it was my parents who'd always told me, like, when you feel strongly about something, like, make sure you're always vocal and passionate about it. Like, my mum's a very, like, outspoken, passionate woman, and I've always been inspired by that. And my dad has always said, make sure you stand up for what's right, even if people don't stand with you, like, make sure you always stand firm in your beliefs and stuff. And then at a young age, I've also been, like, attending protests and stuff, especially regarding things around, like, Palestine. It's something that's like really close to my heart, and as a young person, like I was going to those protests not fully understanding like the complexities of what's going on, but going knowing that it's something that's worth standing up for and worth raising your voice for. So that's just been like an integral part of me. And then growing up, then I remember being exposed to people like Malcolm X, like learning about him on a completely separate journey. Like I'd never learned about him in school, but I went to like a short film screening that was like talking about Malcolm X and his legacy and what he did. And before that, I didn't know anything about him other than the fact that he was apparently like really problematic, and like I'd always associated really negative things with him. But then the more I learned about him, the more I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I can relate to him a lot, actually, like in the way he is in his personality, and like, you know, he might not have a lot of popular opinions, but like he was really firm in his beliefs and things. So yeah, he was someone I also looked into, as well as the Black Panthers, and that's kind of what inspired my involvement in the community, because they did so much for their communities, and it wasn't just about like race, it was about class and like the common themes that we all have like with each other. So rather than dividing ourselves amongst things like race and religion, we could actually come together with like all the things that we have in common and become so much stronger. So I've always wanted to be a part of something like that. I want to help my community. I feel like I have this thing, in Islam, we have this concept called sadaqah, which means like lasting charity. So like, for example, like a really common one is building a well. So if I were to build a well, even in my home country, like in Bangladesh, even after I pass away, like the rewards that I'll get from providing water to that community is ongoing. And I see it the same way with like education and helping your community. It's like you educate one person or you help one person in your community, and that's like a butterfly effect. Like it's going to keep on helping people. So I feel like, yeah, that's a really big part of like who I am and what I do. So community is so important. So I just try to help in every way that I can, be that like advice or support or anything, really. Yeah.
So I think that's so interesting about all of these different projects. Can you tell me about what you're working on now, of course, in this moment, in current events as well, and what's going on around the world? Can you tell me some about what your work looks like at this moment?
So at the moment, I'm currently working on a project called News for All, which is actually with Media Cymru. And I'm lucky enough to be working with a journalist called Shirish. I met him through like a few mutual friends at an event. And I'm co-facilitating these sessions that we do once a month. And the whole idea behind it is to basically have a group of people who are interested in like media, journalism, or just in who want to be involved in something in general, in kind of reimagining what journalism and media would look like if we were to like recreate it, but with people like marginalized people in mind. So this is also something I'm hoping to link to my dissertation, but it's looking at the innovation of journalism. And how like a lot of like mainstream media have left out like a lot of communities, and like the stories are being told but from a totally different lens. Like even if we look back in like 2012, 2013, when there was a lot of stuff going on in Syria, and we had like there was a lot of coverage about what was taking place in Syria, and a lot of people who had left like the country to go there to do certain things. And I think there's a lot of details that have been missed out, and a lot of stories that haven't been told from the right perspective. And I think it's really important to have those voices heard. There's a lot of unheard voices, especially like in our community. So yeah, I feel like this project, it's like it aligns with me really closely. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to like what the outcomes might be, because it's not about like creating something totally new, but it's having the conversations with people who feel that they've been wronged by like journalists and media and things. Like a lot of some of our participants have talked about their experiences with journalists and stuff, and they're like, it feels like policing. Like I feel like I'm interrogated, or even when they are telling stories about like even right now, like what's happening in Gaza, it's like, do we feel like we can trust them? No. So it's about exploring those conversations. Why don't we trust them? Who do we trust? Why do we trust the journalists that are giving us news through Instagram rather than like mainstream media? So that's just one project that I'm working on, but there are a few other things in the works.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Tell me about your inspiration. It sounds like you've kind of already answered this question, but tell me more about why you want to be a journalist. I think that you have so much passion for this work, and of course media representation and things. And I know also, we don't have to talk about it if you don't want, because we're working on it, but dissertation topics. Yeah. I know that you're interested in that type of research too. Yeah. Tell me about that passion for you and where you're hoping to take in the future.
I love this question, because I also don't have like a straight up answer for it.
It's like the dreaded question.
It's a really good question, because it gets me thinking as well. It's like, why am I passionate about it? For me, I've never really had like a straight journey for like what it is that I wanted to do. Like journalism was something that like me and my dad had in common. Like we talk about like news and stuff quite a lot, and he always said like, you'd be a wicked journalist, and I'd always be like, I don't think so. So I kind of dodged around it. But as I've gotten older and I realized how like involved I am in not only my community, but engaged with like news, and that could be like politically, that could be social justice, it could be anything. But I think what really stands out to me about journalism and like the profession is that like there's so much that we don't know that goes into it, first of all, like as like a research perspective, but at the same time about like access. And I feel like for my community, and if I'm talking just about like the Muslim community, I feel like there's not a lot of space for us to feel comfortable, because we've already been portrayed as these really scary group of people that you can't communicate with them because they're so alien. And it's like, no, actually you have British Muslims, and you have American Muslims, and you have European Muslims, and like we all have a lot of similar struggles that people just have in general, but I feel like we've been really alienated from that. And because I never really saw journalists who looked like me or represented my community and like told our stories, I feel like that was a massive thing missing, and that's what's created a lot of divisions within our own communities as well, because we're like, well, these people say this and these people say that, and this is what they said about this group of people. And it's like, actually, if we just have like a few representative voices in those spaces, like that is so like revolutionary to me. I think there's so much space for that, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the media sector, I think so. But at the same time, we can't just sit around and be like, oh, like criticize what's missing. We need to go in and fill the gaps. Like at the same time, the way I'm really passionate about mental health, and in my community, like the South Asian community, there's a massive gap in like the reach for mental health like facilities, because it's really taboo. Like, we don't talk about it. And then on top of it, if you're a man who's South Asian, there's no space for you to talk about it at all. So there are so many like generational issues that we can't even begin to move forward from, because we haven't even put a plaster on it. There's no they haven't made room for it. So I think I really want to be able to be in that space to make room for people. And like, after getting into journalism and stuff now, I've met a lot of young people who are like, oh, I want to do the same. I want to get into journalism and stuff like that. So I think it's really good, because I want to be able to be part of like the journey of like, you know, making the change, or like being involved in conversations. And like, it's not about making like the biggest change. I'm genuinely just doing my best. But yeah, I just think when I'm passionate about something, I need to be active on it. I need to do something. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many ways that you're being active too. I think through that physical protesting aspect, but also I think through writing, that's just as important. And then I think also through sharing other people's stories in this journalism sense.
Yeah.
I think there's so many different facets covered there, which is really exciting. So tell me about, as you're thinking about the media coverage of everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, can you tell me about how you're looking at it through your lens and some of those flaws that you're seeing with that coverage? I think it's so interesting because we're all receiving different just algorithms and things. We're all receiving different perspectives of the conflict. Can you tell me about your perspectives on that this moment, I guess, in the media?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about the media at the moment is they're either completely covering it, but from one side, obviously, or they're not really covering it at all. Like, me and my uncle were actually flicking through like news channels yesterday, and we were like, they're not talking about Gaza like at all. Everything's about the Rwanda bill like yesterday after like 6 p.m. But for me, it's like, because I feel like I've kind of distanced myself from the news since about 2015. So it's not that I don't totally engage in the news. I'll still watch it to be aware, but I wouldn't take all my information from there completely. With obviously now we've got social media, and we do have like citizen journalists, and we've got the journalists who give us news through like Instagram and TikTok. Those to me feel like more verified sources, because they're actually on the ground covering what's happening. So like on Instagram, I know a lot of people are following like Motaz, there's Plastia, there's Bisan, and there's like a few other journalists who are actually reporting to us live like what's happening in Gaza. And it's super graphic. Obviously, like it's not easy to watch all the time, but the reason that we feel like we trust those people is because they are from Palestine, and they're going from one place to another for safety, and they're genuinely risking their lives and like privacy just to show us like what's going on there. Whereas the things that I've seen from like Sky News, like I've been to all the protests, and when they labeled it as hate protests and hate marches and all these things, I thought, do you know how crazy that is to label something that is genuinely just standing up for human rights as something completely opposite, and then to completely run with it? Like the media, like my experience as a Muslim as well is that like I've not had a good experience with the media, because back in, again, like let's say back in like 2011 when Islamophobia was really on the rise, like I was a victim of that. Like I had been called many things on the street, and the media did an amazing job at literally portraying us as these scary terrorists who are like, we need to be careful of them and we need to learn more about them, because again, they just like completely alienated us. So I don't feel like I can trust mainstream media, because I feel like they don't like me, and they don't like my community and my people. So I want to be able to understand things from a fair point of view. So like obviously I'm so pro-Palestine, but I would never be like, oh yeah, like it's okay for like literally anyone to die. No, like obviously death is awful, violence is awful, but we need to also understand like and take in the context behind this entire thing, because this didn't happen just on October 7th. The Nakba started like 75 plus years ago, and there's a very deep-rooted history that Britain takes a big part in. Like Britain plays a big part in why this started in the first place. So I think to act like the saviors and be like, oh, this is awful, and to keep on like a name dropping like Hamas and this and that, it feels very propaganda, like a machine thing. So it's like I feel like it's not only my job, but it's anyone else's job who's like really interested in the way the media operates, to make sure that you're getting the right information and to make sure that you're really fully understanding what you're taking in, because it's easy to even like scroll mindlessly through like TikTok and stuff. You can get lots of false information online, but it's about how how do you take in that information and how do you like understand it for yourself and be like, you have to be critical of things. So yeah, I feel like that was a really long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Can you tell me some about the sources that you're looking at and give me kind of a list of those that maybe you would recommend for other people who are interested in learning more?
Yeah, well, the best one, so Middle East Eye is one of the ones that I've been following for ages. Middle East Eye is really good. They cover a lot of things. Obviously, that's happening in the Middle East. And a lot of them are citizen journalists who are from London as well. So, like, we have, like, a lot of British journalists, but who have, like, a Middle Eastern background. So, Middle East Eye is great. There's one called Eye on Palestine, which has been covering a lot about what's happening, obviously, in Palestine. But then generally, like, the actual journalist, like Motaz is one of the ones that like everyone's been following, and bless him, like he's covering every part of his trauma. Like even the other day, I think his actual neighborhood had literally been like targeted and blown up, and like he lost a lot of people, a lot of his neighbors and people that he grew up with. And then Plestia as well, and Bisan. I'm definitely forgetting a few people, but I think if I remember anyone, I can send them over to you and you can like link them, because there's a lot of Instagram pages that are covering a lot of stuff as well. But yeah, they're the main three that I've like been keeping up to date with, and just hoping everything's okay. There's so much, but yeah, I feel like social media has, obviously it's got its pros and cons, but I think we're really lucky to have access to it the way that we do now, and especially for people like these journalists who are able to cover what's happening and show us directly what's happening without things being cut and censored and stuff. And obviously with Instagram we do have the issue of like shadow banning, and even TikTok, like a lot of my stuff have been shadow banned. My poem about Palestine had been shadow banned like multiple times every time I'd shared it. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like algorithms and the way things are. But I think as long as you're aware of it and like you're still trying to remain as engaged as possible, I think that's what's important. Like we can only do the most we can. So yeah.
Definitely. And I think that segues well into, I'd love to talk with you as well about your mental health work and your mental health activism, because I think it's so important, like you were saying, for people to have representation in that sphere of society as well. I think it's so important for people to see themselves represented in the mental health movement. And I think that we aren't seeing enough representation often around the world. So tell me about the work that you've done on that issue, and maybe some of the issues that you see in your community and what inspired you. Just give me the whole story behind mental health activism.
So we're going again like back to about 2020. So this was again when I started doing my live discussions. So where it stemmed from was like me and one of my friends at the time, like we were talking about like one of the discussions that I wanted to have was about mental health in the South Asian community, but specifically around men. And now I know that the women in our community, we have an issue with mental health, but we do have the space to talk about it in gatherings and stuff. You know how girls are. We talk about, oh, I'm going through this and whatever. But it's not so much the same for the guys in our community. And I saw it from experiences within my direct family. Like I was going through a lot of stuff in 2020 anyways. And I could see like things that my dad was avoiding, and also like other members of my family. So I thought this is a conversation worth having. So I invited my friend on. He's a Pakistani male, and we talked about mental health in our community. And he was talking about his experience. Like I was like, so like when you're with your boys, like is it something that you talk about? And they're like, like not really. It's not like we're not really too serious when we talk about things. Like sometimes we're just, hey, how you doing? And like, you good? Yeah. Like how's things and whatever. But like it's never really like a very deep conversation. And my whole thing was that we also don't have access to it. So like say for example with the boys, you don't like having conversations like that. That's totally cool. But there's no space like I myself have looked for therapists and counselors that are at least from the same background as me. So it's not like you have to be Muslim or you have to be like South Asian. But like if you're a person of color and you somewhat understand my religion, I feel like it'd be easier because I don't have to explain a lot of things, because there's a lot of cultural barriers like that you don't realize until you're talking to someone who just like doesn't understand that actually no, I can't say certain things to my parents because that's deemed disrespectful, or I can't just I'm gonna go for a walk now because I can't do that. Like we just can't do certain things in our community. So my whole thing kind of stems from, I started the live discussion on that, and then Minds Camry reached out to me through like an agency to get me involved in a campaign for better mental health services in our community. And then from there, then I kind of had like, there was a lot of interviews and discussion around it, which was really good because I think it raised a lot of awareness for our community. But I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'm really passionate about mental health because I've had my own struggles and a lot of people that I know have too. And I know how hard it is to look for a therapist that can relate to you just even in the slightest. And I think that's something maybe Wales could look at in particular, because I know in London there is an organisation, I'm trying to remember what they're called, but they're London-based. They're based in East London, and they have a group of like Muslim qualified like therapists and counsellors, and they've started providing these services for free. And they've written in the description, the reason we're doing it for free is because if we don't mend the problem now, we're never ever going to get around to like a bigger solution. Like people in our communities, we can't afford it, can't make time for it, or we can't tell our families that, oh, I'm going to see a therapist right now. Like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So yeah, it's something I'm super passionate about. And unfortunately, I think there's more awareness around it, definitely, but there's still not a lot of room for it. And there's still not a lot of representation. I think we definitely need like more Muslim or like South Asian like therapists and counselors and people who work in those sectors to really help the community. I think that's a really big thing. So hopefully, I don't know, maybe in the future we'll have them. Maybe they're all in the works right now. But yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think you're touching on so many different topics too, and your work is really intersectional in the way that it all ties back to your identity, which is really inspiring. I think when you have that motivation because it's so personal to you, that's the most powerful way to do activism, advocacy, all of the work that you're doing. Can you tell me about your poetry and how that fits in for you? When did you start doing that? Give me the story behind what inspired you to express yourself in that way.
Okay, this is the first time I've ever talked about my poetry.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Because it's one of them things. Like with my writing and my poetry, I've got massive imposter syndrome. So like I'll read, like honestly, I have written for years. Like I love journaling. I just write like in general. It'll be like a brain dump, and then sometimes it'll be like, oh, this would be good as a poem, and it'll like come out with like a bit of rhythm and thought and things like that. And in like recent years, I've read a lot more poetry, and it's not like the kind of poetry that I like to read is like usually like inspired by like Middle Eastern poets or South Asian poets. And one of my all-time favorite poets is Mahmoud Darwish, who's Palestinian. He's like his work is beautiful. I'll have to show you some of his things. But I've always compared myself to him. So like I'll read his work and I'm like, oh, my stuff would never be as good. It's nowhere near as good. Like honestly. So I've hoarded my work for ages. And then I started putting stuff out like on Instagram just related to like, I love books and reading and stuff. So it'll be like book content. And then here and there then when I've written poems that I'm not too scared to put out, I'll put it out. But like recently I've tried to be a bit more like consistent in putting work out. And I'm really thankful that I've got friends who are like super supportive of what I do as well. And they're like, you need to put work out, and like you're a poet and you're this and you're that. And I think that's really helpful because it's really made me like kind of identify with, like I wouldn't call myself a poet before, but now I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe.
Easing into it.
Yeah, maybe I can. Yeah. So poetry for me is really important because I think, I always say literature is revolutionary. I think words and writing, and like I see everything as like archives. And I think poetry is amazing because it's like storytelling, but it's like I like the kind of poetry that doesn't over-explain itself. It leaves a lot open for the reader, and then you get to see how like other readers interpret things. So yeah, and I'm not good at like explaining things. So for me, poetry was perfect. I was like, let me just leave some things like kind of unexplained. Yeah, so then people can interpret it for themselves. But that was also what scared me about sharing my work, because I was like, oh my God, people can interpret it for themselves, and people are going to think this and they're going to think that. But I'm getting a bit more comfortable with that because I'm starting to appreciate that not only should like if I feel like I'm good at something and that I really love something and I do think it's worth sharing, I think that's really important, just to give that work a space. But also when I've shared work, I've had a lot of people message me and like, I love this and I can really relate to this and this is really good. And it's like, it's not about the validation, it's more about like, oh, actually, like, no, people aren't going to just hate your work and be like, this is awful. Like, no, like people are going to like it. And actually, one of the things that was inspiring for me was I was reading some Mahmoud Darwish poetry like earlier in the year, and I came across a bit that he had written, which was exactly the same as something that I had written. And I was like, oh my God,
I've made it.
yeah, like I feel so validated now.
there.
Mahmoud Darwish wrote this, and I wrote it, and I didn't even know. Like, who knew? Who would have thought? So yeah,
That's so cool.
Yeah,
That's so
I love
cool.
it. I think I've grown to appreciate poetry more as well after reading poets that I relate to more, because before reading these poets, it was like a lot of like, you know, I've come across like white American and white British poets, and they're great as well. And then in uni, we studied a lot of like Black American poets, which are amazing as well, and Black British poetry. But for me, like growing up, my parents used to always tell me about like some of our South Asian poets. So there's one called Rabindranath Tagore. He's Bengali, and he's actually one of the first Nobel Prize winners as well. And his poetry is amazing. Like I think Netflix did something a few years ago where they turned his poems into like short stories.
Wow, yeah.
And I remember watching it, and my dad and my mum were like explaining like, oh, this is what he means and this is what this is. And like my mum's such a poet as well. She's really into like writing, so that must be where I get it from.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a big inspiration for me, because now I relate everything back to that. And also like in recent years, I feel like I've connected more with like my cultural identity. So like I'm British, South Asian, and Muslim, but for a while, like as a teen, I didn't feel as connected to like my Bengali, like my background. I was just like, it's not important, because like I'm born and raised in the UK, so I feel like my Muslim identity is more important to me. But then I did go to Bangladesh in 2018, so I would have been 18 at the time, and I feel like I really connected then. I was like, do you know what? No, like I love my culture and my people and my music and like our history. Like there's a lot there that I feel really proud of. So I think that was a really important point in my life where I was like, no, like I want to be able to bring my culture into a lot of things that I do. And plus generally, like I embrace cultures from all over the world. I love it. Like if you know me, you know like I'll eat food from anywhere just to try it. Like I love traveling and like hearing about different cultures and stuff like that. Like I'm really down to try anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like culture is a really important part of me, because it's like, yeah, I just like to embrace all parts of it. I grew up around so many different people and in different backgrounds, and it's like that's all a part of me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important to me.
That's so amazing. I think also the storytelling and it being linked to your mom too, and your mom being involved too, and I think that's so amazing too.
Yeah.
That it kind of takes that push, I feel like, but as soon as you start putting your work out there, and as soon as you start doing it, you kind of fall in love with it.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
You kind of get the bug of like, oh, I want to do more. I want to share more.
Exactly.
I think that's so exciting.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, what? This is the taboo question.
Okay.
This is the worst one, I think. But where are you hoping to go with all of this work that you're doing now? What do you see yourself doing in the future? Big one there. I know. Tell me as much as you can, as much as you know.
Okay.
Let me know.
Yeah, the thing is, I've always had like a few different ideas, and all of them have like the same kind of like core, like foundational thing, which is like, I want to help communities and I want to help young people, and I want to provide, like, I want to fill in gaps that haven't been filled. Now for me, education is a really, really big part of like what I do, and what I really believe in, like young people having access to education, how important that is, but to the right education. Like to me, I feel like systematic like education misses out a lot of stuff. So again, there's a lot of people we didn't learn about. There's a lot of things we don't know how to do, like how to pay bills, how to pay rent, how to organize my finances. Like I've never been good with money because I never learned how to be good with money. Like,
it's so true. That's
you
such
know,
a gap.
there's so many things.
Crazy.
Like, you know, these are skills that we need to learn. But like, also to learn about like the people before us, I think is so important. And that's why like I'm such a big advocate for like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, because if I'd learned about them, I'd know that actually to take accountability in front of lots of people is not a scary thing, because Malcolm X did the same thing. He apologized for a lot of the things that he did, or some of the things that he believed and like taught to other people. And I think that's a really important lesson to learn as a young person. So in the future, my idea is to like, I've always wanted to educate, but outside of the system. and be that through like an actual, like, I don't know, like maybe a community center or some sort of schooling system, or even through like just having a space to have people from all backgrounds and all ages to come up and speak. Like, I'd love to have like a talk show you know, like have conversations with people that I agree and disagree with. Like, I think it's a really good way to learn a lot, and also to give people space. I think it's so important to have space, and especially for young people in particular. I'd love to have that. So there's no like solid answer, because even with journalism, it's not that I want to be like a journalist and go and report stories. I want to give space to people. I want to tell stories for people who might not be able to put themselves in front of a camera or put themselves in certain positions, but their stories they want to tell them, they just don't know how. So I want to be that the spokesperson.
Yeah. I think that's amazing, and I think that's what I really resonate with journalism as well. I think it's not necessarily like the kind of gotcha journalism, like getting the scoop all the time. It's more of everyone has a story, and being able to ask that question that makes the person light up. I think that's the most exciting part, the most fulfilling thing. I think it's amazing. And I also love the idea that you mentioned people that you agree with and disagree with, because I think that's so important in today's society and the way that we have conversations. I think it's so important to invite people and to seek out those conversations that might challenge you a little bit, that might test your biases. I think it's so important.
I think, especially like, again, like with what's happening recently, and there's a lot of like, I'm sure you've seen Piers Morgan having his, you know, his moments, but I think it's important because like we might agree or disagree with them, but there's a space there. You get to see the other point of view, and I think that's really important. I think it's such a skill to be able to sit and listen to someone you absolutely disagree with, but to be like, okay, but what do you mean though? Like, explain that to me. So
yeah. And I think that's the best way to do it, is to ask those questions rather than coming with judgment. And I think so often we think of what we're going to say next instead of listening. And that's cliche, but I think it happens even sometimes when I'm doing these interviews and things. I'm so stressed out about what's coming next that I'm not listening, and I've had to kind of shift my mindset to be like, no, the moment is what matters.
Exactly.
And it's just so important to actually listen to the person rather than just having them speaking at you. I think that's the difference. It's like a mindset shift. But
for sure.
I have one more question for you. Lots of young people, especially students in university, students getting there, want to create change and want to make a difference, but they may not know how to get started with that work. What advice do you have for those people who may be listening?
I think if you feel like you have a calling for something, and this sounds like super corny, but like if you feel like, you know, something, like you're really drawn to something, I think first of all, give everything a try. Like, try everything, even if it's scary. Like, I was scared to put work out. I'm still scared to put work out, but I'm working on it. I'm trying to slowly put things out and create kind of like an online presence for like the things that I'm passionate about. So it's not just one thing in particular. It's like, it's the activism, it's the writing, it's the book stuff and whatever. So I think don't scare yourself out of trying things. We're really lucky to have access to things like the internet, social media and things like that. So you've got the room to try different things. And if it don't work out, it's cool. It's not that deep. Try something else and speak to people. Oh my God, have as many conversations as you can, because you don't meet anyone by accident. Every single person you meet is for a purpose, and you can learn so much from people. And like, it's really easy to focus on like how negative the world can be, and like, oh, people are only into things for this and that, but you can really learn some really great things from people. Like, I think it's really important to see the beauty in each person. Like, oh, this person's really passionate about this, or this person is really good at this. Like, take all those things on and use it as inspiration. Don't get caught up in the negative stuff, and especially mentally, like, prioritize yourself and your health, and just do the things that you feel like really align with you. That's all I can say, is that if you feel something is for you, do it and give it, like, try your best. Always try your best.
I love that idea of trying a lot of things, and then if it doesn't work out, it's okay. Because I think that's so important. I think so many people are so caught up, and so many people being me too, I think so caught up in what people are going to think, like what people are going to say, especially if it doesn't work. And it honestly doesn't matter.
Yeah, really, no one actually cares. No one, it doesn't work out. No one cares
as much as you care.
No one's going to remember.
That's for sure.
Just try something else.
Exactly. I love that. What are the best ways for people to follow along with you and the work that you're doing?
So my public Instagram is Amira Hayat X. That's where I'll talk a lot about like the activism. There's a lot of book content on there, and that's also where I share a lot of my poetry. I do also have a podcast which is on Mixcloud, and it's called In Tune. So it's with radio platform. So I'm hoping to put a few more episodes out on there as well. And on TikTok, I'm just Amira.h, and I put a lot of similar content from my Instagram on there as well. But yeah, TikTok is great. So
okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll link all of that
Amazing.
in the description. It'll be perfect. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. And of course, reach out to Amira as well.
Yeah.
This was actually the last show for the term because next week is our winter break, but the show will be back starting on January 31st, and my guest will be Jasmine Johnson, who is the president of the Students for Organ Donation Society at Cardiff, and their mission is to spread awareness and educate people about the importance of organ donation. So tune in for that episode on January 31st at 5 p.m. But until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you so much for coming on the show,
Thank
Amira.
you for
I had so
having me.
much fun.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.